Welcome to the show. I'm JJ Flazanes, your host. Thank you for downloading today's episode. Today we're going to talk about moving beyond the diagnosis. I met Lauren Polly through Dr. Dane here, who's already been on the show once and will be on again talking about access consciousness. And I love Lauren's story because she has moved beyond the diagnosis. She was diagnosed as being bipolar and changed her diagnosis. So because I'm not an expert in that field, I can't claim to have done that. I really enjoyed our conversation and look forward to introducing you to the work that Lauren does. Before we start today's show and I talk a little bit more about Lauren, I just want to remind you there still are tickets left for the Manifestation Boot Camp, where we can not only change your mindset and beliefs about a lot of things. I'm really gunning to help you get there. So please do not let money be the reason why you do not come. This will be my last event until 2021 that I host, that I can do this, that I can invite you to come and help you get there. So please check out jjflazanes.com/bootcamp or email me, jj@jjflazanes.com, and let me know that you want to come, and let's see what we can do, because this event will also help to rewire your brain in new ways, create new neural pathways, and create new experiences for you. So it's going to be a powerful event, and I would really, really want to encourage all of you who are right on the fence to just take the leap, because you will regret if it's another year and a half until I give you the opportunity again to be with the community and to really do this work live in person with Lisa Thomas, with me, and it's going to be epic and amazing. Again, email me, check out the link, jjflazanes.com/bootcamp, and come join us. We still have a few tickets left. So today's show is Moving Beyond the Diagnosis with Lauren Polly. She is a speaker, life coach, and the multi-award-winning author of The Other Side of Bipolar. Her mission in life is to help others thrive beyond their labels, reclaim their innate gifts, and blaze a unique trail in the world. Welcome to the show, Lauren.
Hello, JJ. Thanks for having me on.
You know, it's very apropos, divine timing, divine connection, how we met and how this all came to be. You know, there are a lot of people who write to me, who pitch themselves to me to be on the show all the time. And I don't obviously take everybody. In fact, I take nobody who actually reaches out for the most part. And this was a situation where I met you through another guest who's on the show, Dr. Dane here. And he referred me to you for something different than what we're about to talk about today. But the fact that you've written a book about this topic, to me, so as people have already heard in the bio, that you have a book called The Other Side of Bipolar, and it's the revealing your strengths to move beyond the diagnosis. I had a cousin who was diagnosed as bipolar, and it's not something that I've talked about a lot for several reasons, but I have talked about sort of wanting people to not focus on a diagnosis like that, and sort of all the other alternative functional medicine, nutritional things that people can do to overcome it to some degree. Maybe they've been misdiagnosed. I find that diagnosis is something that people use as a victim card, and it actually disempowers them. So to know that you've already lived this and you've gone through this and you've done this yourself, I mean, I thought this is perfect. I haven't been able to talk about this because it's not something that I have done myself. And most therapists still like to diagnose people and want to categorize people into categories that I think is disempowering. Not the ones I work with, but so anyway, I'm super excited about today's show, and thank you again for coming on and for also writing a book about this particular situation, because I am sure there are people out there who have just been struggling under a diagnosis for so many years and are just looking for people like you who have overcome it and changed your diagnosis naturally and can help lead the way for them to do the same thing. So thank you for coming on the show today.
Well, thank you. And I think what you said is so huge. I always say, my book is called The Other Side of Bipolar, but it could be the other side of anything, really. Anything you've been labeled or defined as. Labels and definitions are so fascinating because when you first get them, they give you kind of almost a relief, like, oh, at least someone sees me and knows what I'm going through. But very quickly, the tables turn on that. And before you know it, you're getting a whole host of personality traits, future predictions, uh-ohs that you're always going to have to look out for, just these defining moments in your life before you even lived it or created it that really kind of dictate where you go. And so many of us fall prey to that. I love to talk about coming out of the labels and the definitions and using that more for information and relief if that's what it gives you, but also not stopping there and really opening up the doors for exploration. So I'm excited for this conversation.
Okay, so I want to start with the beginning. And I know that in your book that there's your perspective is your story, how you were feeling, how you were experiencing the world, everything you were taking in, how it was being interpreted, all your thoughts about that. I want to go back to, obviously, because people haven't read your book yet, who are listening to the show right now. Just give us a brief synopsis of how you got to a label and a diagnosis of bipolar.
Yeah, things started out really joyfully and easily, I would say, when I was younger. I was very exploratory as a kid, like most of us are. The upsets and the intensity really came on as soon as I hit adolescence. And that is such an interesting point in our lives when things stop becoming about discovering yourself. It starts to becoming about discovering yourself through other people's eyes. And when all of that started to hit, it's like something got tuned up on high volume in my body and in my head, where all of a sudden I couldn't really hear me anymore. All I could hear was other people's judgments of me, their expectations of me, the whispers they were having of each other somehow seemed to invert and get twisted and be all about me. I became quite paranoid with that. My mood started to fluctuate. I was going through very, very deep, dark, lonely times by myself, not really feeling like I could reach out to anybody, not necessarily because I didn't have a support system, because I did, but because I didn't know how to put it into words. And I think so many of us struggle with this sense of angst or upset or anxiety where something just doesn't seem quite quote unquote right. But because we don't have words to go with that, there's not really an open space to be able to speak up, be heard, be seen, and get support. So I stayed locked in that space for quite a little bit, trying to figure things out on my own, kind of putting a smile on the outside. No one would know that anything bigger was going on, but on the inside, having a lot of turmoil. So much turmoil that months and months and months went by, nothing was really changing. I wrote a suicide letter and had tried a couple of times unsuccessfully. And then my mom got a call one day from a teacher to report a low grade that I had. And she calls it a God whisper. We call it intuition or awareness. She just got the whisper to go and search my room. And when she did, she found my suicide letter. So from that moment on, I was whisked away to doctors and had years and years and years of psychological testing and psychiatric medication. The diagnosis itself came because my aunt is bipolar, and bipolar is something that is hereditary. So as soon as they started to hear just a smidgen of my symptoms, it was, oh, you must have the same thing your aunt does. So there was almost a pre-concluded or preconceived notion from the doctors, which I think a lot of people fall prey to. But it was kind of a fascinating journey, having that inner angst and almost that volume getting turned up in that adolescence period that really took me down the dark side.
So really, it almost sounds like while you were suffering, for sure, the rush to the hospital was more about, and the diagnosis was more about labeling something so they knew what to do and how to treat it. And so that there was maybe an answer to why you were this way and some hope. Would that be correct?
Absolutely. And I think it's a double-edged sword. My parents were rightfully so freaked out to find a letter from their 14-year-old about killing herself. They did the best thing they could think of at that time, which was to take me to the best doctors they knew of. And this was years ago. This was back in the 90s. Alternative modalities, holistic approaches, even therapy that is more inclusive and less scare tactic driven wasn't really around. It was way more about trying to find the box that you fit in. I think obviously because I came in with a suicidal issue as well, it was more of a rush job and more of it wasn't like there was a little bit of depression going on and someone had to fix it. It was a little bit more severe at that point. But it's kind of a fascinating thing. I work in a hospital. I'm actually in the medical field, and the diagnosis process, depending on the person actually treating the individual, can be used just as an information gathering and also an open exploration, or it can be used as a conclusion and a definition. And truly what I went through was that more traditional conclusion and definition path that locked me up for a long time.
Can I ask, you don't have to share it with me, can I ask if you know any of your astrological chart?
Well, I'm a Virgo. Is that what you mean by astrological?
Yeah, that's your sun. Do you happen to know your moon?
I do not.
Okay. Okay. All right. Just checking. Only because I think it plays into the astrological energies play into my cousin's diagnosis, in my opinion. You know, I had a front row seat for the show from the beginning to the end. And there were many situational reasons that I thought he was diagnosed as being bipolar. And even if that's something that, let's say, like we're talking about helping somebody, like if it starts at a place where, okay, now let's have some hope, now we know why. You know, a lot of times I use astrology to find out certain energetic possibilities of things too, but it's still open to, there is no hard and fast, you're not being boxed in to, you can't change, and there's, you can't grow and you can't overcome. It's almost like here's a setup. So let's talk about when the diagnosis becomes a jail sentence, when it
Mhm.
stops being helpful, and when it starts limiting you and going in the opposite direction. I mean, would you say that maybe at first it felt like a relief, like, oh, now we know what's wrong with me, but then later it's like, I'm broken and I can't ever get out of this? I mean, talk about that.
It was a total relief at first. I think number one, because I was finally speaking and I finally felt like I could speak. And of course, I mean, anyone who's ever gone through any kind of mental angst, especially any kind of suicidal issues, the more you lock yourself up and make it a secret, the more destructive and big it becomes. So I think that was like the initial relief. Even the diagnosis was a relief because it was like the doctor said, oh, we know what this is. Here are some things that can help. The trouble really came when I started to over identify with it. I talk a lot about the kind of kinky threesome that develops, you, me, and my diagnosis, where all of your relationships, all of your life creations, everything is really colored and filtered through this third entity that's now entered the picture. These diagnoses can be that. They can be this entity that is living and breathing and suffocating the air in the room. So you have a hard time seeing yourself as anything other. And I think that's like a huge journey that we kind of arch through in my book, is me not being bipolar Lauren anymore and me just becoming Lauren. And that's that. So yes, there's absolutely relief when you first hear, but for me, it's way more about the over identification with the label and not really being empowered to see yourself as anything but that.
So I read some of the book and talking about, like, you're going back to doctors over and over again to test your liver functions and your kidney functions to make sure that the drugs you were taking was not overtoxifying you, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So let's go through that end of sort of the, you know, we got to the end of, you wrote a suicide note because your frustration and depression, if you will, not feeling empowered at that point in your life was so high that you kind of were ready to be like, I'm done. So at what point within this diagnosis and the treatment were you done with the diagnosis and the treatment, thinking there's got to be a better way?
I moved to Florida at age 20. I was diagnosed when I was 14, and at 20, I went actually on the Disney College internship program down to Florida, and I met a holistic psychiatrist when I was down there, and he was a godsend. Like, talk about some one person entering your life who changes everything. He was the first person in 6 years, six years of being in the medical system, who not only talked about, of course, the medication and the, typical diagnosis stuff. He talked about diet and exercise and yoga and energy work. And he also talked about this beautiful thing, and this is what I teach people in my business, is more about building your self-confidence and your self-worth and seeing yourself as you, not any other definition that's been given to you. It was a fascinating experience for me. It was totally different than any of the other care that I'd received up to that point. But the freedom that came of, we're going to take our eyes off the pink elephant, that third suffocating entity in the room, and actually put it on you. What are your strengths? What would you like your life to be? How do we go about creating that? And through my work with him, it was fascinating. It was never like, oh, get me off the meds. I kind of thought, I'm going to be on medicine the rest of my life. That's just the way it is with this diagnosis. I stopped fighting it. I didn't see the point in that. For him, it wasn't about fighting it. It was, oh, let's just build up your self-confidence. That built, guess what? My social anxiety medicine was able to be discontinued. We worked a little bit more with mind-body connection and the yoga and the energy work. With that, my sense of paranoia went away. I was able to come off that medication. It was a fascinating thing for me, and I think this is the big uh-oh that people are doing with the mental health conversation. They're putting all of their focus on the big pink elephant, and they're not putting it on the individual. And when you do that, you end up treating the symptoms. You don't actually go to the root cause and outcreate that root cause by fostering the person's sense of worth, their creative spark in living a life where they feel fulfilled, and really tapping into their unique capacities underneath it. So for me, age 20 with that doctor, it wasn't that I was really over the diagnosis, it was that I was shown the possibility of, I'm actually more than this diagnosis. And from there, everything just took off.
Now, part of what you talk about is that you actually changed your diagnosis.
Mm-hmm.
And I just, we just heard that there were two medications that you could get off of. And because the situations and the feelings and the relationship to those external stimulus had changed your response. And now we didn't get into diet yet. How did diet affect what you were taking and doing?
Well, I've always been kind of a nervous belly person. And so whenever I had a lot of anxiety, and my anxiety was, like you said, triggered a lot by external circumstances. Again, I've always been more sensitive to other people than I have to myself, or at least it's always seemed that way. It seemed louder. So I kind of worked around with a nervous belly for a lot, meaning I didn't eat a lot just because my system would kind of shut down. Plus, a lot of the medication I took too took away my appetite. And I was a ballerina growing up, so I was skin and bones anyway. He was really talking about diet from, yes, there were some supplements that he put me on to kind of help, I did like a metabolic test with him that really helped kind of even me out, but then also even just having regular meals. It was something that instead of having my body react in such a way where it shut down to other people, I was able to kind of come into more of a communication with my body. So the diet really assisted with that. The exercise too, just getting me up and moving. I was a dancer, but I had given it up by the time that I saw him. Just getting the blood flow and the pumping again, that really changed a lot for me as well. To speak to your point, yes, the medicine, and I did change my diagnosis, but it was his work with me at age 20, and then my own path that I took for the 10 years after that, still working with doctors, and then being able to employ all these different holistic practices. Deeper and deeper and deeper I went. The medicine just got weaned and weaned and weaned and weaned by the doctors until at age 30, I went into my psychiatrist appointment and said, you know what, I'm on such a minimal dosage. I don't think I need this anymore. What do you think? And I had a delightful, open-minded person, because goodness, to go against a diagnosis that's been written in your medical chart for years, sometimes they're not willing to do. She worked with me. She weaned me off that medication. She followed me afterwards. It was, I think so many people really want to change their diagnosis, but they want to change it immediately. And if you're not willing to put in the work to figure out how you tick, how your body ticks, how your brain ticks, and how you're responding to your environment, sometimes that can be a dangerous path, but there is a way to change it. You just really have to be able to put the work, the time, and the breath, the space to that. It is possible to change things. And even if you don't have a diagnosis overturned like mine was, or come off meds, could you still take that same path just to find a better sense of yourself? Maybe take away some of the medicines that are causing side effects. I'm not pro-med, I'm not anti-med. You need to create your life and actually see what that's going to take for you as an individual.
Yeah, I'm more of the not med, but that's unless necessary for whatever reason. And everyone's path is different, as you have said, right? So for you, this was the absolute right path for you to do it in this very methodical, slow, and way that nobody else was going to necessarily dispute. And that was what. But the fact that you did it, and the fact that we're acknowledging that there is work to be done, and it is multifaceted in terms of what kind of work we're doing. There's always a situation where I mean, I'm going through a situation right now where my iron, my hemoglobin is pretty low, and I lose a lot of blood, and I'm about to do a procedure, and I'm sure it's been done by the time I actually publish the show. But I am taking a synthetic progesterone for the first time. When she said she didn't do bioidentical, I cringed and thought, no way, and realized my access to bioidenticals was on a plane to Africa for a couple of weeks. And so I had to assess it in that moment. The higher risk was not having the help. So I gave in and said, okay, I'll do it. Actually, I didn't give in. I changed my mind. I said, okay, I'll do it because because the risk is greater if I don't do it than if I do it. And I'll only be on them temporarily until I can get a prescription for a bioidentical replacement. So, again, it's individualized. Like you said, you have to really work with you and who you are and where you're going and what contributes to this. And also maybe not even take it as, I'm not saying not take it seriously. That's not what I mean. But I have a therapist that I've worked with for years, and she has a lot of, like that tendency to want to label people. And what I have noticed over time is when you label people, you limit them. And so the people under that care sometimes don't flourish because they've been labeled and limited by your own limitations of their abilities. And since I've seen people leave certain practices, and I work with one of them in particular, and now she's flourishing because I don't see the limitations. I don't care what the diagnosis is. I see possibility because I believe in people's healing, and I believe that you can use all these tools to, if nothing else, just have a different focus. And you're activating something different every day versus walking around feeling broken. You can walk around feeling blessed. And I know that a lot of what you have put in the book and that we've talked about is about you finding your gifts and finding your strengths and why you're unique and different, and the things that might have contributed in the first place to the diagnosis. So why don't we talk about what you discovered along your path and on how you've changed and like literally flipped it from this is a problem to this is a great aspect of who I am.
Yeah, that's my favorite topic. And if you read my book, part one is called Revealing Crazy, and that is through the viewpoint of kind of the Western medical system. And part two is Revealing Brilliance. And that is taking kind of mirrored scenes, exact same situations that I went through when I was younger and struggled with, but applying it through the lens of awareness and through the lens of possibility. And I think it's so fascinating because a lot of the things that do send people down the rabbit hole, so to speak, with mental health are actual capacities and gifts that go misdiagnosed, misunderstood, misutilized. Speaking for example, when I said everything was really good when I was younger and then I hit adolescence and kind of, everything went super, super loud, I am very, very aware. You could call me sensitive, you could call me psychic, you could call me empathic. I'm a medium, I work a lot with spirits. There was a lot of activity around me. And because the noise got turned up in kind of yucky middle school adolescence, the volume got turned up on how I was feeling because there wasn't really a beautiful, not even a definition of who I was, but just a clarity and an empowerment of this is who I am and this is what I'm aware of on the outside. Now, it's fascinating because that was something that literally had my moods bouncing all over the place. I started having very, very, very dark visions, a lot of different stuff going on. But it's also a capacity that I've utilized throughout my entire life, not even realizing it. I work as a medical speech language pathologist. I've worked with stroke victims, nonverbal stroke victims for years. I've always been able to communicate, form really tight, quick bonds with people. I know what they're thinking before they say it. I use this in my life coaching practice all the time. I'm a yoga teacher. It's kind of a fascinating thing when you look at your strengths with how you interact with people, your ability to really be tuned in and have that empathic and intuitive nature about you, and how when you tune into it and actually play to the strengths of that, that's a life creation nugget for you. But because I didn't know it and because I didn't have really strong, clear tools to be able to utilize it, or anyone else around me who utilized it well, it was something that threw me down the crazy path. So that's just one example of being able to go, that one thing was looked at as something that was wrong. Even the doctors said that, you're way too sensitive. You're going to struggle forever. You're way too sensitive. Where now my sensitivity is actually my strength because it allows me to do work in this world that no one else can.
I find that a projection. You're too sensitive
Hmm.
is usually, I don't know what to do with you. That's what that means. I don't have tools to deal with you. Therefore, let me judge you and make you wrong. That is exactly what that means to me. Because as you said, I mean, there are people who I've met and worked with over the years, from people who have struggled with depression because they have gifts that they're not utilizing. And you were probably the same, having gifts that you didn't know how to identify or how to utilize or how to protect yourself at times, right? Like shielding yourself from some of those negative, dark situations that you were intuiting, that you were receiving messages from. And, I'm sure as you have gone down your path, you've figured out tools, you figured out how to stay in balance and maybe how to protect yourself from some of that, or to cleanse it so that it doesn't build up and then become that you're holding on to everyone else's stuff and you can't tell the difference between your stuff versus their stuff, which is a lot of times what I think happens to a lot of people, who then it's just easier for someone who doesn't understand all that to just throw a diagnosis at someone and say, here, these are how you display, and this is what you are. I mean, half the time, again, I'm taking a really broad view here. Diagnosis can be very helpful to lead you down a path. However, sometimes diagnosis can be wrong, and it can be really wrong. And we have to look at the different options and having different feedback and different tools and different points of view to weigh in sometimes when we have no idea, because we don't know what we don't know. And I think one of the best messages that I wanted to send, if somebody had asked me, it might not have been about bipolar, it might have been borderline personality disorder. Somebody had written to me a while ago, and I hope you're still listening to the show, and asked me if I could do a show on it. And I went to a therapist that does DBT, and I thought, oh, I'll do a show on DBT. And then I started to do a little homework, and I asked a few people about DBT, and they said, well, really, it's like law of attraction. And I said, it is. And I thought, okay. But I wanted to, I intuitively said, no, I don't want to do that yet. I don't want to do that. I don't know why. I have resistance to not the diagnosis. I have resistance to succumbing to that you have no power over anything, that you have to decide to be defeated at some point by something. And that because I don't believe that. I believe we can overcome pretty much anything we want to a certain degree. And, we're here to learn lessons in this lifetime. And some of that's on our path for a reason, but I don't like limitations. There's too much Sag in me. I'm all like, no, don't put me in a box. So diagnosis feels like strangling. And I didn't want to strangle anybody. So can you speak to what I just said about, because again, I do get it. The diagnosis at first brings relief, and then eventually it might not. And again, and I don't know your whole chart, but being a Virgo, Virgos like structure. So things that make sense, things that look like concrete, things that, it's logical. It's something that it's somewhere for me to go from. And other people don't like that at all. There's no comfort at all in a box, in a small room. It's too limiting, and it's worse. It's like they feel trapped. Did you ever feel trapped?
Oh, I felt trapped big time. And it's kind of fascinating because the energy beneath what you're talking about is really one of fight. And it's what I work a lot with clients on, actually. It's kind of a fascinating thing where you feel like you get put in a box, and some people accept the box and kind of acquiesce to it, and that box becomes them, kind of their little safety zone. And then there are the people who maybe not even have a diagnosis, but somebody labels you as like the shy one or the bossy one or the one who gets everything perfect. All of those are definitions too, that if it becomes part of you and you don't see any other possibilities, can limit you in certain ways. You have the people who get put in a box that way and they fight it. For me, fighting doesn't create anything. I spent years fighting against the diagnosis, the meds. I was always compliant. That might be the Virgo in me, as you say. But it was kind of a funny thing. Whenever I had an internal battle, it just created more havoc. And there is something to, not to be airy-fairy with this, but there is something to actually relaxing into it, not fighting it, and allowing somebody else, if they're coming at you with a definition, with a label, with a diagnosis. One of my favorite tools from an amazing system called Access Consciousness is interesting point of view, which basically is anytime somebody gives you anything or says anything to you, that is just their interesting point of view. I think because sometimes when it comes from a doctor or an expert or a healer, people do this in the alternative systems all the time. time, they put healers above themselves and get defined and limited that way. It works on all sides. Being able to have anything put on you to go, okay, that's an interesting point of view. What's actually relevant to me? And what can I utilize here? And for me, had I had that tool back then to be like, okay, the bipolar comes in, interesting point of view. What of this information could actually give me relief? And what's my way of working with it? But again, what you had said, JJ, about actually having healers or therapists working with people not in a limiting way, part of what I'm doing is not just speaking to the people who are diagnosed, but the people who are working with that. They're the frontline people. If they were able to take some of these tools or these perspectives into with their clients, we'd have a very different conversation. It's not about fighting the box. It's about going, wow, that's an interesting point of view, but that's their point of view. Don't fight it, relax into a little bit, and then start to sift through it yourself.
That's good advice. Law of attraction basically is to accept and make peace with, right? So ultimately, we are going to be in alignment and centered with ourselves and the messages we're supposed to hear when we're in alignment. And when you're fighting, you're not in alignment. Yeah, access consciousness. It's a new thing for me after talking to Dr. Dane and then working with you and having both of you do some things with me that I think it's fascinating. And I love the idea of making peace with and keeping it, like being that observer of it's their opinion and let's see what feels good to me. Does it make me feel lighter? Does it make me feel heavier? What am I in alignment with? Sort of using your body as a testing method. And I know that some of that work you came into on this path. Was it more recently, or was it part of the work that helped you to expand past this diagnosis?
It did in a different way. So I came off medication and had my diagnosis overturned doing yoga and meditation, kind of more of the traditional holistic approaches. And then that was maybe 2 years later after I got off medication, I found access consciousness. And I found it because I went to a chiropractor who was working with my spine. And she was saying, I think you have some emotional stuff kind of stuck in your body. So she had recommended me going to an energetic psychologist. So I was very hesitant to go back to therapy again, but luckily she worked in a totally different way. And she was the one who introduced me to Access Consciousness, which is basically a set of tools and practices. Some are hands-on, some are more self-utilized tools to be able to change anything that you desire to change. And to really look at the heart of the matter. And the heart of the matter beneath all of this stuff is really the energy. And to be able to look at energetically what's going on. Just because someone is smiling at you in conversation doesn't mean that energetically they're here for you. There's so many things that are mishmashed and incongruent in this world. And when you're sensitive and aware of that, it can be very confronting because nothing matches and you don't know what to pay attention to. It can make you feel crazy. So Access is amazing because it gives you simple ways, simple to use tools to actually find yourself in the midst of all that noise. Like I said, interesting point of view for anything that's kind of thrown in your way. And what that does, it creates a space of allowance. It's not that you accept and acquiesce and lay down for it. It's just that you go into an allowance of someone else has a different perspective, but guess what? You still have yours too. And for me, there's such a beautiful way of working with that because the fight goes away. I'm very potent. I've got a lot of energy. I've got that big fight like you do, JJ. I just noticed that after a while, it was creating more upset in my body, and it was creating more of a havoc energy in my life. That when I was willing and able to kind of come into this more allowing space, it got easier to change things. It's the softer, light touch sometimes that creates more. We're just not taught that.
No, it makes complete sense. The state of allowing is where everything works perfectly. So,
Yeah.
because you're not pushing against it, there's no resistance there. And definitely that is something that we all can benefit from having more of. And so let's talk about, because that's what you're helping other people with now, is that the work that I know that you're in the medical field as well, but talk about so at some point, this all inspired you to start doing different work. And let's talk about who you serve and what's this work.
So the work is kind of a mishmash of my background, of course, which my book goes over, but I utilize the tools from Access Consciousness primarily. Yoga and meditation, it's always been a part of me that kind of leaks through just because the energy is so delicious. But most people who are coming to me with two two things, mental wellness and also life creation. And to me, they play hand in hand. It's really easy to hear a conversation about mental health and come up with lots of preconceived notions and almost check out like that's not relevant to me because I'm not struggling or I'm not diagnosed. For me, I like to play more in the realm of the mental wellness conversation. Where are you in every moment? How would you like to be living your life and spending your time? And how do you go about doing that in a way that's authentic to you, where you have your power? You have the power to change anything you desire to change, and you're also enjoying the ride as you go. So my podcast, my books, my online workshops, all that kind of stuff is all kind of geared towards that. It's more about the life creative element, which plays beautifully with the mental wellness. And truly, I feel like that's what got me not just like maintenance mode and stable in my mental wellness, but took me into a thriving ability where now I'm able to have a career at the hospital, run a have a multi-award winning book and run this international business with ease and with everything continuing to grow because I found a way to actually make my gifts work for me. And I'm in a conversation of creation constantly, not trying to maintain or fix something that someone else has given me. So access consciousness is a huge part of that because their main thing is really looking at, hey, you're the creator of your life. What are you choosing? And if you're choosing something that's creating something that's less than ideal, you can choose different. We just got to use some tools to do that.
I don't know enough about it yet to make all the comparisons, but sure sounds a lot like law of attraction. So I'm looking forward to diving a little bit more deeper. I'm going to have Dr. Dane back on the show, and I want to know because he's all over the world doing things, and you also are all over the world as well, right? Working with people, but I know you're local to me in terms of doing things more in person. So why don't we go over it? Like, so there's the podcast. Your weekly podcast is the Lighten Up Podcast with Lauren Polly at the lightenuppodcast.com. And then your book is The Other Side of Bipolar, Revealing Your Strengths to Move Beyond the Diagnosis. And can they get the book anywhere? Amazon, Barnes & Noble, like normal places?
Normal places and local bookstores too.
So The Other Side of Bipolar, Revealing Your Strengths to Move Beyond the Diagnosis. Lauren Polly. And then let's talk about the work that you're doing with individuals or with groups and how people can find out more about that.
Yeah, so if you're local in the LA area, I have an office here in Torrance. That's where I've met with JJ before. So I do energetic body work, one beautiful practice called the Access Consciousness Bars, which is basically an energetic release. So you're releasing the things that don't belong to you, never have, or things that are just stale and stagnant that you don't need to carry anymore. It just creates a beautiful sense of space and possibility and revs up your creation in a big, big way. So I do that energetic technique. I do a lot of myofascial energetic techniques as well. And then my online communities, I run a membership site called Blaze. It's $27 a month. It's it's a call with me with live Q&A all about life creation. There are the 3 M's that we do, not just the call, but also your home play for the month, all about mindset, movement to get your body in the conversation, and momentum. For me, it's such a huge thing to actually take action. And so many people look at these tools and they play with these different possibilities, but getting the information and getting the inspiration is one thing, but some people just don't act on it. And it's really from choosing something different and taking action. That's what really creates your life moving in a different direction. So momentum is a huge part of that group. I also have a free resource community up on that same network that has all of my content and other resources as well, all about mental wellness and actually how to make that work in your life creation. You can find all that information on my website,
which is laurenpolly.com, LAURENPOLLY.com. So one final question, if you could pass along one piece of advice to install hope in other people who are struggling with a diagnosis in mental wellness or other limitations, what would you say?
you're not alone. And I know it feels like you may be alone because no one really talks about this. It's more of us stepping up to have these kind of conversations where your choices don't have to be judged. You're going to choose for what works for you, but you're not alone in your struggle. You're also not alone in your awareness. Some people feel like, oh, because I'm aware of the world, because I'm sensitive, I'm always going to be struggling and no one else gets it. There are a lot of people who have the exact same thing. Reach out for community, reach out for support, and start looking at what more there is, because there is more available to all of us. And it just takes the willingness to explore and the willingness to ask for support and inspiration and information along the way. You just can't give up.
And I didn't ask this, so I said one last question, but I've rescinded that. You work with you work with other people who have had or have a diagnosis that they're currently working with, correct?
Oh, yes. Yeah. So I see a wide range of people. I mean, I see people who are just straight from I hate calling it a mental institution, but have just been institutionalized. I've got some of those folks. I've got people who are working with a psychiatrist and we're working on life tools and energetic tools while they get traditional care. I work with people with body issues. I work with kind of a whole host of it, which for me is beautiful because we're all creating a life. And again, we're all really looking at how can we have the best life possible in our perspective and in our own fulfillment. So I do work with people from all walks of life, and mental illness is one of them.
So because I like to have people feel that hope as well and know that they're not just going to someone, a lot of therapists and a lot of us in all different healing fields do what we need to learn, right? So when we're looking at some of the therapists in their roles, some of them, they're not healed. They went to therapy because they wanted to get healed. So we have to really remember that everyone's human here, and I want to follow, especially if I want to overcome something, someone who has moved beyond this. So I would say that regardless of whether you're working with someone or not, maybe Lauren can provide some of that hope for you that there is light after, and there isn't an end point, and there's possibly a release of diagnosis in your future and a change in everything in your life, because it really isn't about that label. It's really about living your life, as we talked about earlier in the show. So Lauren, I thank you so much for coming on today. I hope everyone will buy your book and will go to your website, laurenpolly.com, because I just want people to have hope that they can change, they can grow, they can heal.
Yes, you can change the unchangeable. I am living proof of that, as so many of us are. Thank you so much for having me, JJ. It's been a pleasure.